Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few weeks ago, I asked the Minister of Housing if he would join Conservatives in axing the federal GST on housing so that more Canadians could finally buy a home. Axing the federal GST would spark 30,000 new developments across the country per year. This tax cut will save $40,000 or $2,200 a year in mortgage payments on an $800,000 house. Unfortunately, the Minister of Housing refuses to remove this burden from Canadian shoulders and still clings to a housing accelerator fund that doesn't build homes. The NDP-Liberal's Housing Accelerator Fund has failed Canadians. Toronto received $471 million and they increased development cost charges by more than $20,000. Ottawa received $176.3 million, and they increased development charges by between 11 and 12%. In my own hometown of Abbotsford, we received $25.6 million, and they increased development charges by 54%. And indeed, even in the letter they sent to Minister Fraser, to the Minister of Housing, after he requested a supportive letter from them, my own municipality cannot tell the minister how many homes, in fact, have been built with the housing accelerator money they have received. Mr. Speaker, it's unfortunate this government promised to lower rents, mortgages and housing prices, but has instead doubled these costs for Canadians. Before the Prime Minister took power, it took 25 years to pay off a mortgage. Now it takes 25 years just to save up for a down payment. Things have gotten so bad that some families believe that they will never be able to pay off their mortgage, let alone get one. Only in Canada has housing become so unaffordable so quickly. Home prices are expected to once again break the records they set just recently. Between 25,000 and 35,000 people are homeless on any given night in Canada. 30% of Canadians who are homeless come from Indigenous communities. 22% of shelters are aimed at young homeless in Canada, while 20% of people experiencing homelessness are between the ages of 13 and 24 years of age. 88% of renters are saying that their goal of owning a home is out of reach, so much so that 28% of Canadians are considering moving to another country for greater affordability. Back in October 2015, a month before this Prime Minister took office, it only took 39% of the median pre-tax household income to cover home ownership costs. Now it's about 60%. While it used to be normal for working-class youth to buy homes, 80% of Canadians now tell pollsters that home ownership is only for the very rich. Removing the GST on new homes under $1 million would not only spark new developments across Canada, it would also remove a tax burden for new homeowners in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I listened with interest to the member, and he is a good member, and I know he cares a great deal about his community. He talks about families in his community and families across the country. What he doesn't mention is the Conservatives would, right away, if they were to assume office, cut childcare support, which is now moved in many parts of the country to $10 a day, and where it's not at $10, it will soon be at that level, making life much more affordable. They would get rid of the school food program. We've seen tremendous progress on that. Recently, the provincial government on Ontario came together with the federal government. We've seen Manitoba move forward. We've seen Prince Edward Island move forward. What about support to help those living with diabetes? Free insulin, Mr. Speaker. They would get rid of that. And what they'd also do, to the point at hand, is get rid of support for housing. He talks about this big, bold idea, so-called, that the Leader of the Opposition has put forward to lift GST off of the purchase price of a home. How would they pay for that, Mr. Speaker? They would pay for it by getting rid of the Housing Accelerator Fund, which my friend, unfortunately, has not characterized correctly here today. I don't discount at all the importance of development charges. They are an impediment to getting more homes built, and municipalities have to find a way to lower as much as possible development charges. But what he doesn't talk about is the systemic changes that come as a result of this federal government attaching conditions to federal funding for municipalities so that, for example, zoning changes can become possible. Throughout too much of Canada's history, certainly into the modern day, we've seen certain types of homes, they're building anyway, outright illegal in this country. It's been outright illegal to build, in some neighborhoods, duplexes or triplexes or fourplexes, row houses, for example, mid-rise apartments. All of that would add tremendously to affordability to help the families in his community. Those young couples, for example, I especially have them on my mind, who have a tough time, if they can put together a down payment, finding a home that is affordable for them. They can't do it right now in so many instances. Zoning changes allow for that. What this federal government has done is said, we recognize that restrictive zoning is a huge impediment to getting more homes built, and we've attached conditions onto municipalities that if they want federal dollars for housing, for infrastructure, that they agree to make zoning changes, and many are. 178 agreements at this point, Mr. Speaker, and that number will grow. Finally, Mr. Speaker, on this point, he fails to also mention that this GST proposal of theirs would lead to the cancellation of the government's infrastructure support for communities. You can't have housing unless you have infrastructure to connect, for example, water systems to homes, to connect roads to homes, to make neighborhoods possible, Mr. Speaker. We've said there is a need for that, and we attached a condition there too, that development charges be frozen to April 2024 levels to ensure that development charges and that issue is in the first instance dealt with, but also to ensure that municipalities are doing what they need to do to get more homes built. This is why this condition exists, and the Conservatives get rid of it.
The honourable member for Mission Mascot, Fraser County.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think me and the member from London can agree on one thing, that zoning reform is indeed needed across Canada. It was actually under the previous election platform from the Conservative Party where zoning measures were introduced as a means to spur more development. The Liberals, in fact, copied our plan. The Premier of British Columbia implemented similar policies and actually targeted my community of Abbotsford to put in those very zoning changes to encourage fourplexes, etc., to be built. In fact, my very street is now zoned for fourplexes. I will note the member mentioned $10 a day daycare. There's only one place in Abbotsford where you can get $10 a day daycare, and that is on Eagle Mountain at the new elementary school. This is the highest income area of the entire community. So what they've really done is given the people with the most money more support under that program. It's a shame. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Parliamentary Secretary.
Agree to disagree on that point, Mr. Speaker. Childcare, $10 a day, is moving forward in communities across the country. As I said, where it's not available, it will be available in communities throughout the land, and that is critical to our country's economic success and to our shared future. On the point at hand, though, again, to stay on topic, with the accelerator fund, his proposal, his party's proposal, would get rid of that program, which would be a detriment to communities in his riding. The Lytton First Nation is counting on that fund for 176 new homes. The Boston Bar First Nation, 65 new homes as a result of that program. And finally, the Seabird Island Band is counting on the Accelerator Fund for 251 new homes. I'm not sure what the opposition has, or the official opposition has, against the federal government working with municipalities, with Indigenous communities to get more homes built and attaching conditions to ensure more homes get built. We are doing that, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to. The Conservatives are standing in the way.